Everybody. Welcome to the third in the AXR Sales Director Incubator. Great to have you all on again this morning. My name is Mike Dixon. I lead the Sales and Marketing Recruitment Division for AXR Recruitment and Search. And over 20 years as a professional recruiter, in fact, almost 25, my biggest frustration is seeing people's careers not reach their potential. And my view around that is it's about a succession of decisions that are not as effective as they could be, career conversations that are not as good as they could be. So the Sales Director Incubator is to understand why that happens and to help prepare you, our future and current leaders, to have better career conversations, to make better career decisions and get the most out of your career. Now, the Sales Director community feels passionately about this as I do, and we've got 12 sales directors lined up between now and Christmas. This is number 3 out of those 12. We want to share their experiences with you. And in today's session, the third session, we're delighted to be joined by Jonathan Morley, Head of Sales for Nestle Purina. Welcome, Jonathan.
Morning, Mike.
Over 15 years, Jonathan's packed a lot into his career. He's worked across sales, marketing, and category in the pet care, liquor, toys and food space in the UK and in Australia. As head of sales for Nestle Purina, Jonathan's got a growth mindset, which he'll talk about, and that involves bringing a real positive energy to his team and to his role and his customers. So we've got lots to talk about. Now, given the number of people we've got on the call today, guys, for those of you who haven't been on the session before, you're all on mute, sorry to say. But hopefully you can hear us and see us. But we'd love to hear your thoughts as we go. And so be as active as you like on the chat function. We've got some pre-submitted questions we'll get to at the end of the more formal session today. And but if you've got questions as you think of them, just pop them in the chat facility, and it means we can grab them at the end. Last time, a bunch of questions came through literally as we're wrapping up, so we didn't get time to go to them. So please jump on quickly. That'd be awesome. So let's get into it. Before we really get into your career journey, let's just start by getting to know you a little bit more personally, Jonathan. So how do you kind of de-stress out of work? What's your favorite thing to fill your personal time with?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a young family. I've got a 4-year-old daughter, a 2-year-old son. So they certainly keep me busy outside of work. But you know, that's something that I really enjoy doing, spending time with my family and spending time with my children. But for me, a really good way to de-stress is actually cooking. So it's a bit of a creative outlet. It's a task you can start and finish and complete. So that's something that I really enjoy doing at the end of the day, and cooking and having dinner with my family. And I also enjoy running. So it's probably the only time that I get time truly by myself, with my headphones in and just focus. So that's certainly something that I enjoy to de-stress too.
Fantastic. I can certainly, I'm with you on the running. That's definitely my de-stress. I love it. And I've become more of a cook during COVID, funnily enough. So yeah,
very good.
Yeah, my repertoire has gone from about 3 dishes to maybe about 10. But I've become quite experimental, which I love, but my family aren't so keen on. So some of the recipes are maybe a little bit out there. Cool. So you graduated 2005
Yep.
With a commerce degree, and you started at Mars about not long after, but a year after. Was FMCG your first choice back then? Is that what you wanted to do?
Not necessarily, no. So, I mean, I think for me, I was really keen to get on a graduate scheme with a leading business. You know, I looked at banking, I looked at lots of different companies, retail as well. So Accenture, Aldi was a graduate scheme I applied for as well. And I think for me, I wanted to work for a big organization that would give me lots of development, but lots of career opportunities. And you know, so I really was open, and I was lucky enough to get on the Mars graduate scheme, but it didn't start straight away. So I actually went into recruitment for a few months, and I was really fortunate to go into executive FMCG recruitment. And that gave me a really good opportunity to interview lots of different candidates, but also understand different career paths. So it was a real helicopter view of a career. And then that really helped me understand how I could, you know, make the choices and build my career to where I wanted to get to.
Fantastic. What a great way to kind of get that insight. You know about careers. Yeah, it took me a long time to get there. I did FMCG first, then into recruitment. But and when you at Mars, that was Mars that brought you to Australia in 2010. How did that move come about?
Yeah, I mean, it was it was a really interesting opportunity because I was working on the Asda account in the UK at the time, and when I was on that Asda account, they very much ran it as a global account. So our local JVP rolled into the global JVP, and I spent a lot of time connecting with the US team and with the global team. So I built a really strong connection with the US team. And you know, for me personally, I always really wanted to have an international career and move to different places. And at the time, my wife was a buyer working for Asda in the head office. So it was a really logical career move for us both to move to Bentonville in America to really develop our careers. And so I applied and targeted a job running the Sam's Club account actually in America, which is Walmart's equivalent of Costco.
Right.
And I nearly landed that job, but the guy that was in the job was going to move and relocate somewhere else, and that fell through. So that opportunity closed down. But at that point, because I'd been flagged as someone that was open to international moves, you know, they started talking to me about other roles, and a role came up in Australia in the Woolworths account in Sydney. I'd never been to Australia before in my life, but I'd only ever heard good things about it. And I was really fortunate that they flew both me and my wife out to do a bit of a market orientation to learn about the business and to learn about the role. And you know, obviously we took the job, and the rest is history. But you know, for me, that was a not an easy process by any means. There was lots of challenges on the way through that process. But I was fortunate that I actually had a really good contact in the Australian business who had previously worked in the UK business. So to leverage that local contact and to keep connected with that team really helped me through that process.
So that's awesome. I think a lot of moves seem to be the result of opportunity, and others are the result of being well planned. And I often look to the sports analogy. You talk to top sport people and they say they're really lucky, and they say it's funny, the harder I try, the luckier I get. Do you think that is the same within business?
Yeah, I mean, I live by the mantra, you make your own luck in life. But I think, yeah, absolutely, you know, the harder you try, there's more opportunities within that. But also, the more strategic and focused and planned you are, you know, that really helps as well. You know, for me, I set myself a really clear goal, and I worked hard to achieve that, and made it clear that that was what I was trying to work to, which really helped me engage people around me to support me to achieve that goal.
Yeah, excellent. An area that received a lot of feedback in the first two sessions, Jonathan, with Louise and Swati, was the discussion we had around the move from operational to strategic. Were you aware when you started to operate more strategically?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good question, because for me, when you think about operational versus strategic, I think about the timeline. You know, so operational is really about short-term decisions, whereas strategic's about long-term decisions. And you know, when I really started moving into more strategic thought was when I did my first cross-functional move into customer marketing. And at that time, customer marketing reported into the marketing department. And there was a real step change for me in terms of strategic thinking and thinking longer term through that move, because it was less about the operational day-to-day delivering the month or the quarter, and more about, you know, what's the brand launch next year, what's the point of sale that we're going to source around it, what's the materials that we need, and really working on that further timeline really makes you a bit more strategic in terms of the choices that you're making, because it impacts things so much more further down the chain. And actually, you know, if you make a wrong decision, you know, 12 months out and it's, you know, 3 months closer to the launch date, you can't change that. You know, you are where you are. So it really pushes you and puts pressure in different ways. And so that was a good example where, you know, for me, doing a cross-functional role really gave me that opportunity to grow in that strategic thinking space.
Great. And what advice would you give about someone who's in a more operational role that could start to flex their strategic muscle?
Yeah, I think my advice would be take on projects and really take on the opportunity to connect with different departments and different teams. And I think there's always great opportunities to do projects in the business at any level. And I think if you put on your development plan that you do want to do more strategic thinking, then I'm sure any business that you work for will help you and guide you to those opportunities as well.
So your advice is don't sit and hope you're going to get asked, but actually put yourself forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and push yourself to play a role in that project that does get you into that strategic thought process, but also really reflect on some of the decisions that you're making and the potential outcomes. Because I think for me, once you really get into the detail of that strategic thinking, then it's a muscle that will only continue to grow.
And interesting, certainly in my experience, when somebody who's worked for me in previous leadership roles I've had have actually put the hand up and said, can I get involved in this? You love it. You love that enthusiasm.
Yeah.
You're always going to encourage it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, it really is a great measure of high potential and capability is people that can, move. I mean, with an operational role, the basics are, get into the detail and deliver the day job, and then you free up the capacity so that you can do more. Yeah. And I think in any role, there's an evolution. So the first year, the first 6 months, you're going to be really into the detail, understanding the complexities of the job. But as you transition through that role on a longer term horizon, there's naturally going to be efficiencies that you've found, that you're going to be working smarter, and therefore there's going to be capacity where you can do more and add more value.
Yeah, tremendous. So back to you. Do you set specific career goals? Are you kind of very focused in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I touched on, at the start of my career, I had a really clear vision of where I wanted to get to, and starting my career at Mars was an awesome business to work for because they really champion talent and push people through very quickly. So, at the age of 25, I was running the second biggest account in the UK, albeit on secondment, but, to get that experience at that level was quite rare and quite unique. And, that organization had, many directors that were under 30 years old. And it was a really great business to aspire to that fast progression. So I really, set myself certain benchmarks. But what I did do that, and an example of that is I set myself a goal of being a sales director by the time I was 35.
Right.
Which thankfully I achieved. But I didn't put myself under a whole load of pressure to go, I have to do 5 moves before I get there. Yeah. For me, it was more of a medium-term vision that then focused me in terms of what choices I'm making so I can get to my end goal.
Right. Okay. And in your career path, and everyone's career path, sometimes there seems to be a move you make that might be more risky than another move. What's the kind of biggest risk reward move you remember looking at and thinking, wow, this comes off, it could be great. It may or may not come off, but there was a kind of a high degree of risk reward to it.
Yeah, I think it was my first cross-functional role moving into the customer marketing department. I'd had a long time in sales. It was certainly my comfort zone. It was something that I was passionate about doing, but also delivering great results in. And I think at that stage I'd gone, I'm almost running out of things to learn a little bit, until I can get to the next level. So it was a natural choice and a really good opportunity for me to put my hand up and do something different. Yeah. And I landed a customer marketing manager role with a team of 4 at the time. And, that for me was team leadership, which is something a bit different, but also moving into a completely different function and department. And so that felt like a huge risk for me because I'd have to coach and develop people that, functionally, I just did not have the detail of what they were doing. But, what stood me in really good stead was being humble and being open about that. Yeah. I made it really clear to the business, but also to the team, guys, I'm not the expert here. I can't guide you in the detail. But what I can add value in is, commercial acumen, focus, let's really think about the ROI. Let's think about how we can connect more with the sales team. Yeah. There's a lot more softer benefits that you can bring to a cross-functional role as opposed to the functional benefits. And I think by being open about that, people will be a lot more keener to support you and appreciative of that position.
Right. In this session, one of the things I've been really pleased with is the number of females that have signed up for the program. There's over 40% of the 200 plus people we have on the program are female. And I think that's a very different number. to where FMCG was, particularly in the commercial function, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, particularly, having been in this space a long time. Do you think that that number, 40%, is representative of FMCG generally in terms of sales, or do you think we're kind of blessed that we've got a good gender mix here?
Yeah, I think you've done a great job getting a great mix on the program, Mike, because I'd say in the marketplace that's not generally what we see, which is a real shame. It's certainly something that's improving, which is great, but it's not where it needs to be. And female leadership is something that I'm a huge advocate of. Both professionally and personally. Personally, my wife is progressing her career. I've got a daughter. I really want them to be successful. But also professionally, some of the best line managers that I've ever had have been female leaders. Yeah. And the way that they lead is very different at times to males. And I think to get that true diversity of thinking and thought, you really need as much cross-pollination that you possibly can from all different diversities. Yeah. And so for us at Nestle, we do have a gender diversity strategy, and we focus on female leadership support. But what I like about it is that there isn't a specific timeline on it. We're not saying we want a certain percentage by this time, because I think if you put a timeline on it, you then start forcing the outcome that might not be the right outcome. And I think, it's better to be aware of it, but also to build plans. So what we do is we look at high potential females and we support them through lots of training and development, but also making sure that they've got the confidence and the right environment to be successful as well.
Right. Do you think the role of the modern sales function within FMCG has evolved in a way that has actually made the role more attractive to females? And I guess that's a really leading question, because I do think traditionally, and for those perhaps outside the profession, they look at sales as quite male orientated, where the alpha chest beating male is seen as the person who's going to compete and win and get to the top. But certainly my observation is the roles evolved a lot, and that may kind of have led to a better gender mix. But is that just my view, or what would you say?
I'd agree, Mike. I think absolutely the times are changing, and what was traditionally absolutely an alpha male environment is transitioning quite considerably now. And I think for me, the big focus for leaders today are around mindfulness and making sure that we've got an environment that we're supporting our people in the right way. But I think mental health has been such more a bigger focus and a bigger priority for businesses. And that's really changed that environment of putting your fist on the table and saying you hit that number this month or you're sacked, to be a lot more nurturing and supportive. Yeah. And I think the other thing that's really helping the environment is flexible working. And as a leader, I think it's really important to advocate for flexible working. I think there's always the impact of, if you're in the office first and you're in the office till late, there's going to be an impact on your team thinking, should I go? Should I not go? And I think if you can be an advocate of, working smarter, not harder, if you've done your work to a great level and you've finished at 4 o'clock, then go and, have a great work-life balance. Because from my point of view and my experience, happier, engaged team equals better outcomes.
Yeah, cool. Let's get into your support networks. From a leadership or mentor perspective, is there an individual perhaps that is giving you the confidence to go for things more than anybody else has?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think for me, having a network is really important, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a mentor as in someone that can guide you and has got necessarily more experience or been there and done that. I think it's about having a network of people that understand the context of where you're at. They might work in the same industry, they might have done similar roles, they might have the similar aspirations to you. And I think, those conversations with those friends, I get a lot of value from in terms of the sense check of how are you going, how am I going, throwing out different ideas, asking questions, I think is a really important thing to have. But I don't have, a specific mentor that I go to for advice and for help. I guess I've just got a blind faith that, I'll get out there and make stuff happen.
Yeah. Turning it around a little bit, then let's look at the. I think what mentors, can do, or leaders can do a good job of is actually being honest with feedback. And I think people receive feedback in different ways. But what's been perhaps the toughest piece of feedback you've received, and what was it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, feedback is so critical to anyone's personal development, and I would recommend everyone to do a 360 at least every other year. You know, to really do a sense check across both your peers and everyone in the organisation to really understand how you're travelling. I take feedback really seriously, and it's really helped me develop through my career through different evolutions. And a time where I got some, really quite direct feedback was I was at CUB and I was looking to move my career forward, and I got the opportunity to apply for a role that at the time was leading the spirits division within CUB. So Cougar Bourbon and a few other sort of secondary liquor brands. And it was actually a really cool, pseudo general manager role, because you had a marketing team, there was a sales function, and then there was a real clear remit of growth and making change. And the incumbent of the role moved out, and his job title was general manager. And the business reshaped it a little bit and called it business manager. And so I kind of figured that I had a really good chance of getting that role. But at the time, I just couldn't look past the job title. And, I made it really clear to the business that if it's not a general manager role anymore, I'm not interested. Right. And, HR sort of, tried to guide me a little bit and go, are you sure? Are you sure? And, I went through the process, and I think I was overly confident. And, at the end, I just laid it on thick and said, it's a general manager role, otherwise I'm not doing it. And sure enough, I didn't get the job. And someone else did. And the feedback was really direct, but really valuable. And so the feedback was, look, we've got a question around your maturity and your thinking here, because this is a great role that you can learn a lot from and you can add a lot of value to. But actually, you've really led the whole process around a job title conversation. Yeah. And the other piece of feedback that came from that was, when you go into a team leading responsibility position, that ultimately is the most important thing in a role. And the other feedback was, for at no point through that process did I say, where's the team at? What's the priority of the team and how are they feeling and what's the capability program? It was very much centered around, what do I want to get from the role? And again, that was a really quite, direct piece of feedback, but highly valid, and something I've taken with me ever since, because it refocuses, the role and why you're there and what the core priorities are within that role. So for me, that was a pretty harsh, piece of feedback, but highly valid, and I think quite relevant to a lot of people, because a lot of career conversations I have with people do center around job titles. And from my experience, my recommendation is almost think about the role excluding the job title. The job title is the last thing that should come into it. Think about what the core fundamentals are of the job and what you can learn from it, but also where that job's going to take you in your next evolution and next move. And I think if you look at it that way, you're going to be a lot more successful.
Couldn't say it better myself. It's a frustration, I think, of me and probably a lot of recruiters, where a candidate's going for a role and they fixate on the title, often leading to a poor decision, as opposed to thinking about what is this role going to do to my career? Is this going to broaden my skill set, my commercial capability, in order for me to go further? Is this going to add to me, as opposed to it's the wrong title? And titles vary so much by sector, by category, by company, that they really aren't all. You can always, and here's a bit of advice, guys. Never lie in your resume, but your resume doesn't have to be word for word exactly what your job title is. It needs to reflect what the role was. So really don't stress about it. Yeah, good. Okay, let's move into your career future. What's your next career goal, Jonathan? And what do you think you need to do to get there?
Yeah, I think for me, it's general management is where I'd like to get to. I don't have a specific path to get there. It's more of a medium-term goal.
Yep.
For me now, I'm really enjoying this role that I'm in. I've got a fantastic team. We're in a really strong place in terms of our business evolution. So I'm certainly not looking right now to move anytime soon, but I certainly have longer term career aspirations. And in order to get there, I think it's about strong commercial delivery, but it's also about building a strong team below me that can operate almost, in my absence. And one of the things that I've learned on my journey through team leadership is the people that progress and the people that move to the next level are the people that build their team to the point where even if they're not there, the team's operating. And I think, in the role I'm in now, when you think about moving people and promoting people, if someone's leading the team and the team are not stable, you can actually do more damage to the business moving them away out and destabilizing that team than you can just adding value to that career. And so, the huge focus for me is about building a really strong and successful team, but also to enhance their careers and help them develop as well. Because when I think about, my biggest achievements in my career, it's not about growing an account. It's not about, delivering more profit. It's actually about the people that have worked for me that have, been promoted and moved on. And I think for me, that is a much more enduring legacy than growing an account performance or growing sales.
Great. Excellent. Left field question. Who would you want to work for if you could pick any leader from any field in the world? Who do you think would be the most inspiring to connect with?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting question. I've thought about this one a lot, and for me, I'm going to say Elon Musk.
Okay.
And I don't think he's necessarily known as being a great line manager or a great leader. But I think what I admire about him is he's been a real trailblazer to make a massive change in an industry that was really established. And he's done it a number of different times. So with PayPal and then coming into Tesla. And Tesla is an organization that I find really fascinating. And then even with SpaceX, he's actually almost outpacing NASA, which has been, a huge funded organization for a long time. And, for me, I just love to understand, how he approaches that and how he tackles that significant disruption and takes people with him. Because, in Tesla now, they're 5 to 10 years ahead with the technology than even an Audi or a BMW. And it just blows my mind that they've achieved that in such a short time frame. So to be part of that journey, I think would be quite fascinating.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll keep my eyes open for you. Okay. Let's look at advice and how we can help those on the program with their career decisions. As everyone probably now knows, I do get frustrated when I see somebody not reaching their potential, and the reason for this program is me figuring out what can I do to help people make better decisions so they do get more out of their careers. In your experience, why do you think some people's careers reflect their potential and others don't?
Yeah, I think for me, there's a potential, but there's also a desire. And there needs to be a balance of both. And I think when I've seen people with really high potential, their desire has lacked in some areas. And I think that's a frustration as a line manager and as a leader.
Like a drive, you mean? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So the desire to get to the next level or to be, a more senior position, I think is a challenge. And that's probably where people haven't necessarily achieved as much as they could achieve in their career. And then on the other side of that is people that have been frustrated because they haven't progressed fast enough or they haven't got to the level that they think they should be. And, unfortunately, that creates a bit of a negative aura because, that frustration can be seen from a mile off. And, you then start to operate in a way that you feel like you're too good for a role or, you shouldn't be here. You see your peers progress past you and that can create some frustration. So I think they're the two extremes that I've seen where, both of those environments can hold people back.
Okay. Do you ever get approached for advice on how to get the most out of a career conversation? Does anybody ever come to you to say, I want to talk about a career, I don't know how to go about it. What advice would you give me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me that the best piece of advice I would give is just be really honest about what you're trying to achieve. I think a lot of people, hold back a little bit in terms of their true aspirations because they feel like They don't want to come across as too direct, or they don't want to be coming across as arrogant almost. You know, I want to be the CEO in 12 months. You know, lots of people might feel that way, but they don't want to share it because they've got this internal conflict of, yeah, but that's not realistic. So if I say that, they're going to go, you know, that's not realistic. What I would encourage everyone to do is to be really honest. And if it is, I want to be the CEO in 12 months, clearly, you know, there's going to be some guidance from your business around that may or may not be possible, but let's talk about what is possible. And I think that is a really healthy conversation to have. And you know, for me, it all comes down to your personal development plan. And the more transparent, the more you open you are about what you want to achieve and how you want to get there, the more chance you've got of getting that support to achieve that outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would reflect similarly, because in my job, I'm interviewing people a lot, and I ask that question about goals, and the minority of people have a goal. The majority will come to me with very little thought put into anything more than the next role in front of them.
Yeah.
And that can be very debilitating in terms of decision making, because if you're only fixated on one particular role in front of you, and you're not got a longer term goal, then you're missing perhaps another 4 ways to get there.
Yeah.
And it's being, I think, look, not everyone can have a perfect 5 or 10 year plan, because it changes. The world changes, as we know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But if you've got something more longer term you're aiming towards, then I think you open up many more paths to get there, and the conversation becomes much more rich as well.
Yeah.
As opposed to there's just one role, there's one promotion that I'm going for. So certainly, I think great if someone can bring that. We talked in the last session with Swati about the results of the survey we ran, and the LinkedIn poll we did, which got a really good response on sales director attributes. What makes a great sales director? And there was certainly a leader that came out of that, which was connecting people to a vision. Actually, I can't think the number, but it's over 50% of people certainly said that was the predominant attribute. In your experience, Jonathan, which leader has done the best job of that in your career, where you felt the most connected to, you know, the vision of the organization you worked for?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some great leaders and some really strong visions through my career, which I've benefited from a lot. But for me, it was when I originally joined CUB. The leader there really had a strong vision, and she wanted to really turn around, you know, the account performance, but also the relationship. And you know, CUB did a lot of turnover with Woolworths Group. They still do today, and the relationship was rock bottom. So the Advantage Group survey, I think there was 25 suppliers in the Advantage Group survey. We were number 25.
Wow!
So
okay. Couldn't get any worse.
Correct, right? De-risked it. But you know, it was literally rock bottom. And I remember going in, and the category manager said to me, "I can't have a meeting with you in Woolworths head office because I can't be seen with you." And it was that bad. But she had a really clear vision.
What's her name? Sorry,
Shana Honges.
Okay.
Yeah, so she works for Kimberly-Clark now in the European business. But I worked with her at Mars, and I also worked with her at CUB. And she was part of the reason why I left Mars, actually, because she was a really inspirational leader, and you know, someone that I stayed connected with once she left Mars, and that's how the CUB opportunity came about.
Right.
And she had a really clear vision around, you know, this is where I want to get the account turnover, and this is how we're going to do it. Okay. And what was cool about that was, you know, it painted a really clear picture of what did success look like, and what was my role in that. And they were the two, I guess, excuse me, two elements that really drove my engagement on that. And there were a lot of metrics that we built, and we really went in there to lift the capability of the business, but also the relationship with the account, and absolutely achieved it. So to go on that journey was something that I really enjoyed.
Fantastic. And if it's the most important trait for a sales director, being able to connect someone to a vision, how can a team member contribute to helping a leader develop on that? Because if you flip that around, it's incumbent on if we understand that, hey, the most important thing for my sales director to be successful in their role is to connect, you know, the business to and me to a vision. What can I do to help them?
Yeah.
What advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be curious and be an advocate of the strategy. You know, in simplicity, I think hopefully your leader's giving you a strategy that is digestible and easy to understand. You know, I've got a really clear vision with my team that is really simple. And you know, what's really pleasing for me is my leadership team are now pushing that into their teams in terms of their aspiration that links to that vision. And so it becomes really connected all the way through the teams. And I think that's when it becomes really powerful, because everyone is connected, but they're clear on what their commitment to that vision is and how they want to get there. So yeah, in simplicity, it would be advocate for that vision where you can.
Okay, great. Looking at, we touched on this before, the importance of broadening your career. You've heard me talk, and I'm sure many people who know me have heard me talk about the Mckinsey T Model, where Mckinsey used this model to measure the upwards mobility of a leader, how much potential somebody got. And it talks to somebody who has to be functionally strong, but have the commercial breadth, which is where the T comes from. And commercial breadth comes in lots of different ways, but it's often an easier thing to do to create breadth earlier in your career, because if you run up a function too quickly when you're early on in your career, you can find that it's more difficult as a more senior person to then start broadening your experience. What advice would you give for somebody who's in that early to mid-stage career about ensuring they pick up enough broadening experience, and how would they do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd say do it as soon as you can, because to that point, you know, as you do become more senior, it is absolutely harder for you to do those cross-functional moves. So the sooner you can do it, the better. I always think about, you know, your career is almost your experiences are your badges, and you know, they're really going to enable you to get to the next level. But when you do get to that senior position, you need to call on those experiences that you build in. And so the more broader you can build your experience base, the much stronger leader you're going to be. And I think, you know, the other thing to consider within cross-functional moves is being really clear with your business on what your end goal is. You know, the way I like to talk about it is it your final destination, or is it a stop off? And for me, you know, having a stop off is a great thing to do in your career, but articulating it in that way is important, because there's a risk when you do a cross-functional move that you then get stuck in that department, or you get stuck, you almost typecast into that area. And if your goal is to, you know, have a variety of experiences, it's just really important that you make that clear within the organization that you're in, so you can get back to where you want to get to.
Great. Actually, questions come in on the chat, which I think is relevant to the conversation from James Tan. Thanks, James. Interested to understand from Jonathan, with the benefit of hindsight, was there a role or area of the business that you felt you could have benefited some time in prior to getting your current role? As I guess anything else you'd like to have done before you got to where you are now?
Yeah. I think the only area that I probably would have gone into is something a bit different, like a logistics or, you know, potentially more of a core marketing role. But for me, you know, I think I've done customer marketing, I've done category, I've done sales operations, and then, you know, mainly sales account management. And for me, that kind of stood me in good stead. And I think there's a risk of overplaying the cross-functional move a little bit, because at the same time, you know, if you do have an aspiration in your career to hit a certain level by a certain time, you don't want to get lost in a wood of cross-functional moves. Like, you know, I think you need to be quite focused on what is the skill that you want to get, and what's the experience you want to get. And I think for me, 2 or 3 cross-functional moves are going to give you enough hindsight and enough knowledge to enable you to be more informed. And you know, for me, I was really fortunate in my customer marketing role at CUB to experience many things with that: local brand management, sponsorship and events, activation in store, working with different agencies. So it was a really quite varied role, you know, at a relatively junior level that gave me lots of experiences. Whereas I think in a smaller organization, or even in a bigger organization, you don't necessarily get as much breadth, because, you know, your remit is quite operational in one area. So, you know, for me, it depends. You know, the answer to the question would be, it depends on what experiences you built through those cross-functional moves.
I like your gut instinct was logistics, because I reckon that supply chain as a function. If you think about the Advantage Report, one of the first 2 or 3 measures on that, it's supply chain. You know, so that's the most important thing to the customer. And there's not really a talent flow between the commercial function and supply chain, but actually I think there should be.
I totally agree. And it's interesting, it was a conversation I've had with our head of supply chain quite recently around, you know, in my experience, where graduate schemes have worked really well is you almost do a rotation as VRP, and then you do like a national account executive role, and you kind of move through. And some of the best commercial leaders I've seen have done those VRP roles. You know, they've really got into the detail of how does the logistics side of the business work. In other organizations I've worked in SAB Miller, for example, the head of sales also was the head of supply. So that was a company that brought that function together, and they were hand in glove. So, you know, for me, that's a really good example of bringing the two functions together.
Yeah, great. When you're recruiting yourself and hiring people, either looking at external or internal talent, do candidates ever take the conversation beyond the role that you're interviewing them for?
Yeah, not very rarely, to be honest. It's quite unique, and I think it'd be something that would excite me quite a lot, because, you know, as I always say to my team when they're hiring, don't hire the person for the role today, hire them for the role tomorrow. You know, and what's really important for me in my function is we have talent that we can move people through the organization. Yes, there's a balance of people that want to sit in the role and do a great job, but, you know, where you've got high performing accounts like a Woolworths account, for example, I don't want that team to sit in that role for 5 years. I want to, you know, work them hard, grow them, develop them, and move them on. And I think in any of those more stressful, high-pressured environments, there ultimately is a timeline that you can do that job before you become too fatigued.
Yeah, it's. I'm not surprised to hear you say that, and I think it's one of those interactions that we have when we're going through a career that often is missed in terms of the career conversation. It shouldn't sit simply at a review or an appraisal, but actually when you're coming into an organization through that recruitment process, if you are clear with the organization what your goals are, what your long-term goals are, no business is going to be unwelcoming of that conversation. You know, I'm not surprised that your enthusiasm was there, because a candidate, I think, going for a role, it's the same as when I interview them more generally, but if they're going for a role within an organization, they're talking about the value they can bring, not just to that role, but perhaps over time. Then that's the return on the asset for the company, as well as actually delivering for the candidate's goals too. So I think it should be a very healthy conversation, but very rarely done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, it's hard to say without knowing the organization and the structure. It's hard to say these are the moves, but I don't think it needs to be that granular. I think it needs to be, look, I've got a commitment here that I want to be at this business for the next 10 years. Here's some ideas I've got in terms of cross-functional moves or the end game. You know, can you talk to me about how you see it and how you see talent developing for your organization? I think for me, that would be a really healthy conversation, because it demonstrates to a candidate that, you know, you can be successful longer term in a business.
What other advice would you give a candidate going into a recruitment process? With some candidates you'll meet, you know, for you, they nail the process, they do a great job, and others struggle, and it's often difficult to understand, you know, how is somebody performing the interview as opposed to how they can perform in the role. But the better somebody performs in the interview, the more likely they are to get the role. So what advice would you be for someone going into the recruitment process?
Yeah, I think it starts with do your research, leverage your networks. I think it's almost just as, if not more important, that you get the right organization for you than the inverse. And, you know, there's lots of different ways you can do that. You can leverage your network. You can find people that have worked about business. You can grab them for a coffee, reached out. You know, actually quite recently, I got a LinkedIn message from a guy completely out of the blue, was applying for a company that I previously worked for, and said, hey, I got some questions. Do you mind if I ask you about the culture, the business performance, you know, just some, you know, general questions. And I was more than happy to drop him a note back and give him some advice. And he actually really appreciated it. So for me, you know, that's a brave thing to do, right? Just pick someone out of the blue and say, hey, can I ask you some questions? Maybe they'll delete it, maybe they'll be offended by it, but actually they might just say, yeah, here you go, and here's your answers. The other things you can do are leverage, you know, reports around you. So the Advantage Group survey is a really truthful and telling way of how business is performing. And if you can get the detailed report in the category, you can actually see in a more granular way, how's the category team performing, how's the supply chain team performing. And I think for me, that's a smart way of understanding where the business is at. And then, you know, the scan universe as well, if it's a leading supplier, you can really understand, you know, where they're growing and where they're declining. So you can really prepare yourself for that environment. But I think for me, the biggest advice I would give is be really focused on the culture of that organization, because there's a what and a how. Like the what is about the performance, the role, the requirements of the role. The how is all about how they're going to support you and how do you interact and what's that team culture about. And to make sure that that fits and gels well with you is probably more important than the functional side of the business, because functional is easy to learn. It's easy to understand a new system, but actually, if the culture isn't what you enjoy or how you operate, then that can become a really challenging situation to be in.
Yeah, I think being prepared to get into the fit conversation and have a rich conversation around culture, not just a throwaway question or comment that doesn't get into any depth.
Yeah,
is great advice. But I think what you said at the beginning there is fantastic. I remember Louise said something similar when she was talking about advice she would give about going for a role, and she talked about how she would leverage her network and also actually how she approached people who weren't in her network, but actually she approached people for help.
Yeah.
And humans are pretty good people generally.
Yeah.
I think you say people might delete a message. I reckon 9 out of 10 wouldn't. 9 out of 10 will help you.
Yeah.
As you did, without question.
Yeah.
So I think being brave enough actually will always get the reward, and actually asking somebody for help. And those little steps go a long way in preparation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think the other piece of advice I'd give as well is, if there's a business that you admire, or there's an organisation that you're really interested in finding out more, there's no harm in reaching out either to one of the leaders or to the recruitment team to say, hey, I'd love to understand what roles you've got, maybe not now, but for the future, because I think that kind of speculative career planning is also a good thing to do as well.
Absolutely. Before we get into the Q&A, and there's another interesting question in the chat, but we've got lots of questions submitted before Jonathan. So we'll finish up the formal section with, what 3 pieces of advice would you give a potential sales director?
Yeah. I think number 1 for me is cross-functional experience and knowledge. I think that's really going to stand you in really good stead, because as a sales director, clearly you're accountable for the sales department, but on a leadership team, you're engaged on so many different more topics and things to make decisions on. And so the more informed you are, the more value you can add within that leadership forum. And so cross-functional experience is not a must, but it's certainly something that I would advocate for and would add value. The second one for me is a personal development plan. If you want to get to that role, you need to be really strategic and planned about how you're going to do it. And, for me, for anyone, regardless of the role that you go into, a personal development plan is critical. And it's interesting, like it's one of the most important things that you could possibly do with your whole year, is plan for your mid-year review or year-end review, whatever cadence your business has. And I know we've spoken about this before, but in my experience, it's so one of the most hardest things to do as a leader is to say to people, right, we've got this review coming up. And, what fascinates me is people will work all evening and weekends to do a great range review, or, they'll work on a negotiation with a customer. You say to them, oh, hey, we're meeting at 2 p.m. for your one-on-one. And they look at you and go, oh, can we move it to next week? Or, I've not done any work.
I've not done any preparation.
Yeah. I think for me, your personal development plan is critical for that, because you can get really strategic about asking your line manager, what do I need to do? What do you need to see from me in order for me to get to this next level? And let's get focused on that development plan so that I can exceed those expectations. And, for me, when I do my mid-year or my year end, I always try and visualize my leaders stood up in the people day. What are the key points that they want to land on me? What are the 2 or 3 things that I've done a really good job of? And then I will almost empower them with those facts so that they can move that on. And that's what I try and do with my team. But sometimes, people look at you as if like, what's all the questions about? Like, you can see my KPIs. And I think for me, that's certainly something that, is a big opportunity for many people to really focus on, what are their achievements and what they've done. So that's linked to the PDP, but it's also a bit how you can run, your mid-years and year-end reviews. And then the final thing for me is really building that strategic thinking. So, we touched on it before, from operational to strategic, but realistically, to be in one of those more senior level roles, you are going to be a lot more accountable on the long-term strategy. And for us, there's a 3-year market business plan process that I get involved with. And it's really about, thinking about where do we want to go in the next 3 to 1 years. And it's really hard to step out of the day-to-day and then, go from 0 to 100 into one of those positions.
Yes.
And so the only way that you can get there is by doing projects to really build, that strategic thinking to ready you and arm you when you're in that situation. So just to summarize, it would be cross-functional knowledge, really strong personal development plan, and then the final thing is building that strong strategic thinking.
Fantastic. Let's go into some more questions. So a couple in the chat. From Alison, how would you rate the pressure, stress of leadership role versus when you were a senior NAM, for example, and how would you prepare yourself mentally for the increased accountability that comes from senior leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, for me, it's about really, taking care of yourself as well, both, mentally and physically, but also benchmarking your expectations. Because I think in any high pressured situation, you just need to, I guess, at times take stock and take a step back and go, are we saving lives here? Like, is the business going to be burnt down tomorrow if we make this decision? And yes, the pressure increases, but at the same time, I think really good leadership is about empowering your team to support you through that. And, leadership doesn't mean you're the one, the buck stops with you and you're the one making all the decisions and all the answers. I think good leadership is about enabling your team around you and actually canvassing decisions and helping people help you make that decision. You're certainly not an island on your own, and that's kind of my mantra. So, for me, I don't necessarily feel that there is a significant amount of pressure increase because of that environment where you think about as a senior NAM, a lot of the time you're by yourself, right? And you're there and you go, do I give them this unit deal? Do I do that margin? Do I move this promotion? Like everything is a decision that it would be inefficient for you to engage people on. Whereas actually when you get into senior leadership, the decision isn't here and now, it's down the track. So it gives you a lot more time to engage different opinions and help people support you through that.
Great. I think that whole team concept, Swati talked about very well last 2 weeks ago as well. A question from Elizabeth. What's your advice on how to leverage skills into different sales channels? Large businesses tend to look for someone that have the exact channel experience and are not too open for someone from different sales channels.
Yeah, again, that's a great question. And that's certainly something that I've experienced before. I think for me, it goes back to what's the fundamentals of account management. And, certainly for my team and the way I operate is I wouldn't be held back, with someone with pharmacy experience, for example. I wouldn't put you into an independent channel because actually I'd look at it around the complexities of the banners, the complexity of the supply chain, and that knowledge that you build there is highly cross-transferable to a Metcash type channel. And then I think, if you've only ever done a Metcash independence role, does that stop you from doing a Coles or Woolworths? Probably not. But I think ultimately it comes down to the leader in the business and their maturity in terms of enabling you to do that. So my advice would be really leverage and break down what are the core fundamentals that you've learned in that role. So negotiation, account management, joint business planning, they're the cross-transferable parts that you can move into the other role. But the other thing I would say is, really think about if that business doesn't want to back you to make that change and they don't value your experience, then maybe they're not the business for you and they're not the right environment that you're going to thrive in as well.
In these strange times we're in, you're in the pet care industry, so lots more people staying at home buying cats and dogs. So there's real spikes in demand and impacts supply chain and all sorts of complexities to work with. How are you boosting team morale and leading your team through COVID?
Yeah, it's certainly been a really interesting time. And I think, for us in our team, we've got a great team culture. We connect a lot. We communicate a lot. What I generally do is, outside of our standard meeting rhythms of a Monday morning sales call, etc., is I'll meet with my leadership team for a coffee on a Tuesday. and we talk about the week, we talk about priorities. And through COVID, that's been quite challenging because, you know, we're not just going to a cafe and sitting down and having a coffee. So, you know, the key principle for me was to over communicate and connect with that team more often. So from a weekly catch up, it's now a bi-weekly catch up. But the other thing for me is, you know, with us all working remotely, you miss that connection from other departments and also your wider team.
Yeah.
So I connect with my direct reports a lot, but I don't connect with the wider team. So I put in Friday drinks, and we get the team on, you know, the video call. But for me, the theming of those drinks is really important because that's how you really involve everyone on the call. Because at times it can be awkward when you're on a video call and there's 20 people watching, but actually there's only 2 people talking.
Yeah.
And it's those people that are, you know, a bit more quiet and maybe a bit more introverted that don't, you know, always contribute. And so for me, having a theme is a great way to go, hey, Mike, you know, what's your fancy dress outfit today? And then, you know, you pop up and we can have that conversation.
Yeah,
so that's probably the main thing for me. And then the other thing is leveraging technology. So at Nestle, we've gone into Team A and Team B. So, you know, Team A and Team B can't meet 1 week in the office, 1 week out of the office. And I still did my quarterly team offsite, but we did it in 2 separate pubs. So Team A were in a pub, connected for a TV screen, Team B in a pub, connected for a TV screen. And then we did 2 separate dinners. And I think that's a great way of still, you know, bringing the team together and connecting with them where you can, but also respecting the challenges we've got in the environment.
Great, great. Time for perhaps just 1 or 2 more questions before we wrap up. But one question I often get, which I'm interested because you've worked in large organizations typically, how do you build your profile meaningfully within an organization?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question, and it's certainly something that I would encourage everyone to consider. I mean, I think for me, there's many ways you can do this. I always have recommended social events are a great opportunity to really build your profile, but connect with senior leaders. And there's always this kind of advert, like, you know, people don't want to be seen as, you know, being overly keen or sucking up to a senior leader, right? But what I find is the more senior you get, the more adverse people are of approaching you and having a conversation with you. And so if you can go to a function or an event and make a really clear effort to go and speak to your CEO or your general manager, it will add value if you do it in an authentic way. You know, just, hey, want to talk to you about your family or what you're interested in outside of work. My recommendation would be don't steer it towards career and go, hey, did you see my sales results last month? I grew my account at 20%. People see through that pretty quickly. But yeah, I think for me, connecting in that way is really important. The other thing that we have in our organization, which I know a lot of other businesses do, is we've got Workplace, which is a great way to connect with you know, the team more broadly. And for me, that's a great way to build your profile, because you can use Workplace or Yammer or any of these other, you know, social media forums to post about, you know, what you're doing in your role or some interesting insights in the industry. You can actually use it to comment on people's posts as well, you know. And I think again, it takes some confidence, and you have to be brave to comment on the CEO's post, or, you know, to pump someone up in a team that you've never met before. But the impact on that is really positive. And again, it's about getting your name out there constantly. So that's definitely a way in the new environment that we're in with COVID, where we're not connecting at social events and we're not connecting face to face, to really build your profile. And then the final one in today's environment with COVID is turn your camera on, you know, be present. And it's something that we at Purina are really focused on, in terms of being present with our camera on all the time where we can. But it's interesting in other organizations and in other forums that I've been in where people don't. Now, you know, if it's 8 o'clock in the morning and you're still getting ready for work, I get it. But, you know, if it's a business meeting and it's 11 o'clock in the morning, in my view, there's no reason why you wouldn't put your camera on and really be vocal. We use Microsoft Teams, and it only shows, you know, 9 tiles, I think, at the minute. And so if you're not actually being vocal and talking, your face doesn't come up on one of those tiles. And so the other recommendation I would have is, at the start of the meeting, unmute and say hello, and then you're on that screen and people can see you. And I think that's being mindful of that and really driving that profile is critical. And I know I've experienced some people being uncomfortable with this before in the past, but if you want to get to the top and you want to build your profile, you need to get, you know, comfortable with the uncomfortable.
That's a great way to finish, Jonathan. And that's us almost on 9, guys. So we'll be pretty good in time with this. So thank you. for giving us your time and letting us into your journey, and some great pieces of digestible and practical advice there as well, Jonathan. Your career, like everyone's, is unique, of course, but I think the difference between those who are in the role of sales director and those who are on that journey is that you've actually created a lot of opportunity along the way, and it's enabled you to get there and develop the breadth that's given you, many more options to keep progressing as well. And I think I look forward to seeing where the career goes next on that way to general management. I hope that today we've given everyone on the program a lot to think about in terms of how you prepare for your career conversations that will challenge you to think more laterally, to make great decisions that will pay off, not just for the role in front of you, but for all of your career. In finishing, I look forward to seeing all the next session in 2 weeks' time, on August the 20th, when we welcome Caroline Waite, Sales Director of Frucor Suntory. Caroline's actually on a maternity leave just now, but she's delighted to be giving us her time, which is fantastic. So looking forward to that. Thanks again, Jonathan, for today, and thanks everybody for joining us on the call. Have a great Thursday, and see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks now. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.